It was a cold, foggy night when a small group of campers huddled close around the crackling campfire. The flames cast flickering shadows on their faces, and the forest around them seemed to retreat into the thick, impenetrable mist. It was a night where even the bravest might feel a chill creep up their spine. One of the campers, Jack, decided to tell a story that he claimed was true. "This forest," Jack began, his voice low and deliberate, "has a dark history. They say it's haunted by a ghost so terrifying that even the wolves dare not wander too close. Her name is the Wailing Woman." The campers exchanged nervous glances, but Jack's tone drew them in. He continued, "The story goes that a woman once lived in a small cabin not far from here. She was an outcast, accused of witchcraft by the nearby villagers. They burned her cabin down with her inside, but before she died, she cursed the land. She swore she'd return to haunt those who dared to step foot in these woods." The fire crackled louder, and a sudden breeze rustled the leaves. One camper, Lucy, glanced over her shoulder nervously. Jack smirked. "Oh, it's not just an old legend," he said. "People have seen her, a pale, ghostly figure wandering the woods, her hollow eyes glowing in the dark. They say she appears on nights just like this one, when the fog is thick and the air is deathly still." As if on cue, a distant howl pierced the night. The group froze. It was a wolf, but something about its cry was unnerving, almost human. Another howl followed, closer this time. "Wolves," muttered Sarah, another camper. "They're just wolves, right?" Jack shrugged, but his smirk had vanished. "Usually, wolves don't come this close to a campfire. Maybe they're running from something." The group fell silent, listening. The howls grew louder, joined by the sound of snapping twigs and rustling leaves. The fog seemed to thicken, swallowing the forest around them. Then, from the shadows, a faint figure emerged. At first it was barely visible, more a shape than a person, but as it drew closer, the campers could see it clearly, a woman in tattered, soot-stained clothes. Her face was pale and gaunt. Her eyes dark pits that seemed to drink in the light. She moved unnaturally, her feet barely touching the ground. Lucy screamed, but no sound came out. The woman raised a hand, pointing at the group. Her mouth opened, but instead of words, an ear-piercing wail erupted, shattering the silence. The campers clamped their hands over their ears, but the sound seemed to come from everywhere, drilling into their skulls. "Run!" Jack shouted. But the fog was so thick they could barely see their own hands. They stumbled through the woods, the ghost's wail following them like a predator. The howls of the wolves joined in, creating a symphony of terror. Suddenly, the wailing stopped. The campers paused, gasping for breath, their hearts hammering. The silence was oppressive, as if the forest itself were holding its breath. Then they heard it, footsteps, soft and deliberate, circling them in the fog. "She's playing with us," Jack whispered, his voice trembling. Out of the mist, the ghost appeared again, closer this time. Her eyes seemed to lock onto each camper, as if peering into their very souls. She raised her hand again, and this time the ground beneath them began to tremble. Roots burst from the soil, writhing like snakes and ensnaring their feet. Sarah screamed as she was dragged backward toward the ghost. Jack lunged to grab her, but the roots tightened, pulling her out of reach. The ghost leaned down, her face inches from Sarah's, and whispered something no one could hear. Then, just as suddenly as it began, the ghost vanished, and Sarah collapsed to the ground. The fog began to lift, the howls of the wolves fading into the distance. The campers regrouped, their faces pale and their bodies trembling. Sarah was conscious, but dazed, unable to speak. They didn't wait to find out if the ghost would return. When they reached the safety of their cars, Jack broke the silence. We're never coming back here," he said, his voice hollow. The others nodded in agreement. As they drove away, the forest seemed to watch them, the trees standing like silent sentinels. In the rearview mirror, Jack thought he saw a pale figure standing at the edge of the road, her hollow eyes glowing faintly in the dark. And from the depths of the woods, a single mournful wail echoed into the night.